Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's May 3rd or May 4th, depending on who you ask. It's really hard to say. It could be May 4th. It depends, I suppose, if you're scheduling events for the Premier of Alberta, in which case it is Wednesday, May 4th. But if you're with the rest of the world, then it is Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. It's happened. It's here on Monday. In a shocking turn of events, Danielle Smith told the truth, kept her promise. Promise was she was going to drop the writ on Monday, and she did. And and what a wild couple of days it's been already. Um, there's so much to talk about tonight. Literally, we were, for some context, if things get a little bumpy down the road, we were literally putting the show together right before we went live because it's a fire hose about all of the things and the stuff. Before we get into the really juicy stuff, there's one thing that we wanted to talk about real quick because it's really quite important, and it has to do with crime. There's been a lot of conversation in the run up to the election about crime. I don't know, boy, I don't know. That's a West Wing reference for anybody who watches the shows that I do. But crime's been a big deal. We've been hearing a lot about public safety. We've been hearing a lot about the downtown cores and how incredibly unsafe everywhere is. You can't go anywhere without crime and stuff, unless, of course, you actually take a look at the data, apparently. Jamie Livingston is a professor out of Halifax, and he provided a little bit of data. Here's Alberta's Crime Severity Index. I'll read the tweet that he put out. Alberta's provincial election is here, so it's a good time to remind people that there is no crime wave sweeping Alberta, despite the fact that United Conservative Party has spent 4 years stoking fear/insecurity and redefining structural inequities as crime problems. And you can see on the map right there, crime really kind of peaked at around 2019, almost when the economy was still in the crapper, more or less. And then as the economy started to recover, crime has progressively, the crime severity has been progressively going down. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as we have politicians on all sides going, but the crime, it's the worst thing ever. We have to do something about the crime. Because it turns out it's not actually technically necessarily all that bad. But we're into the campaign now, and Danielle Smith. On Monday, we saw announcements from both the NDP and the UCP. We're going to do the NDP one a little bit later. But Danielle Smith had a fascinating little driveway gathering because apparently that's what was available. I haven't we haven't seen anything on the justification for the venue choice, but we want to start off with a little clip from that that launch.
The truth, I didn't anticipate it being a campaign issue because I thought it was so obvious that whoever was running would want to support Calgary.
So that was a clip about the arena. She was asked, "Hey, the arena thing, you've kind of made it an election issue. What's up with that? Why is it an election issue?" And her response in that clip is to say, "You know what? I never thought it was going to be an election issue. I don't know why anybody ever would have believed it was an election issue. It's not like I specifically myself said that it was an election issue."
There's still one more hurdle in front of us as we get to the finish line. After the election, the province's contribution to this arena deal must be approved by provincial cabinet and the Treasury Board before the end of summer. That's why on May 29th, I'm hoping Calgarians give our UCP government a clear mandate to proceed with this arena deal. Calgary, it's time to move on with this project. We can't afford to go back.
So Calgary, on May 29th, Danielle Smith would like a clear mandate, but not apparently in an election-y kind of way. It just in one of those generic non-election-y mandates that happens on the same day as the provincial election that everybody's been talking about for the last forever. It's pretty interesting, but it's not just the province of Alberta and the election that's paying attention to the arena deal. There was this little gem that popped up. This is Tempe Wins, and apparently Calgary isn't the only city who's trying to figure out what to do with the next arena. Tempe, Arizona is trying to figure out how they're going to do their next arena, and they're advocating. Tempe Wins is advocating for, hey, you know what? Instead of taxpayers paying for it, how about the super rich people do? And it what can only be described as a crippling embarrassment to the province of Alberta. They compare and contrasted the proposed Tempe arena, where they say $0 in taxes to Tempe residents, check mark, and then they also included the verses, the picture, 844 million in taxes to Calgary residents, and then included a picture of the proposed Calgary Event Center. So just take that in for a sec. The arena deal is so controversial, such a hot topic. Some people would say expensive for the wrong people, that Tempe, Arizona has taken notice of just how messed up this whole deal situation is. But that's not all that was talked about at Danielle Smith's press conference. One of the other things that came up, of course, because it was the first press conference since the deadline, the CBC deadline, to apologize and say sorry for playing Danielle Smith's own words against her, and talking about the fact that they had anonymous but very reliable sources who claimed that there were folks from Danielle Smith's office who were trying to influence prosecutions. How dare they? How dare they? Danielle Smith decided that apparently there's some things that are a little bit more important.
Early April, your lawyer sent a notice of defamation demanding that the CBC retract and apologize for a January 19th story that you called defamatory and containing baseless allegations. The letters gave a deadline on Friday before you intended to bring a lawsuit against the CBC under the Defamation Act. And I have received a response from your office, but I'm wondering if you can just clearly say yes or no whether or not you followed through with your intention to sue the CBC on this matter. And if you're going to repeat the talking points that I received from your office on Friday, can you please explain why you don't think voters deserve to know if someone seeking public office is following through on a threat to sue the public broadcaster?
Look, I think that Albertans are interested in what we're going to be campaigning on to move the province forward, and that's what I'll be focused on for the next 4 weeks, is making sure that people understand exactly what a UCP majority government will deliver, and that's going to be my my sole focus for the next 28 days.
So I guess Danielle Smith is not going ahead with her. And again, this is another one where you have to pay attention to her words, because she didn't say, yes, I'm still going to sue the CBC. She didn't say, no, I'm not going to sue the CBC. She said, I think that Albertans are more interested in what's going on with the election. Timed that very well, I did. So I'm gonna be focused on that. So no, as always with Danielle Smith, it seems no, yes, no, no. But it seems like at least until the end of May, Danielle Smith isn't going to be suing the CBC. It appears, is how we'll carefully hedge our statement on that one. But there was more that came up, because one of the other questions that came up at this press conference had to do with a very strange thing that we talked about on our last episode, which was the spontaneous ish apology that came from the candidate in Livingstone, MacLeod, Chelsea Petrovich.
Candidate for Livingston McLeod, Chelsea Petrovic, has apologized for past offensive social media posts. She didn't specify what those posts were. What do you think of that?
Look, the candidate came forward and disclosed to me some posts that she was embarrassed about. She's was very sorry for them, and I accepted her apology. And she wants to focus on moving forward, and so we will.
So that comes out of the apology that Chelsea Petrovich issued on the weekend. And that apology, just as a little bit of a refresher for everybody, that apology read, with the provincial election campaign about to officially begin, I want to offer this statement. As somebody who's used social media since I was a teenager, I have many old social media posts I'm not proud of. Often I used humor to deal with trauma or high stress environments, and that includes using crude or inappropriate language. As someone who had no intention of ever seeking public life, there are some comments and posts that I now know I should have been more prudent about before engaging with. I regret not researching some topics over the past 15 years more thoroughly before commenting. I want to apologize unreservedly for these actions and all of the hurt that I have caused. I pledge to the residents of Livingstone MacLeod that moving forward, I will communicate in a way that is respectful. And she goes on to thank her family, friends, and for everybody else for the continued support. Now, this has caused a lot of conversation because there's some people who are looking at the Chelsea Petrovich apology and they're going, hey, you know what? She's kind of taking some responsibility there. She's kind of saying, I said some dumb things. I'm sorry. There's some other people who are saying issuing a blanket apology for what you may or may not have said over the last 15 years, maybe that's not so much a get out of jail free card. Maybe if somebody has 15 years of history that they need to just sort of carpet bomb apology for, maybe that's cause for some concern. Maybe that speaks to a pattern of behavior. Maybe that speaks to a little bit of character. There's a lot of people who have said, you know what, if the apology was sincere, maybe this was something that she could have addressed before the election started up. Maybe this was something that could have been brought up well in advance of that, but it doesn't seem to be the case that that's what the priority was. Now, we've received a few DMs where people have been talking about what they have heard or believe was in these posts. Apparently, there's a lot of people who did see some of these posts, and some of them are pretty graphic. We're not gonna speculate as to what they were because we haven't seen the actual posts ourselves. But it's going to be fascinating to see what prompted this apology, because certainly it's not something that came up during her mayoral campaign. Because you have to remember, she's a mayor. It's not something that came up during her nomination campaign, but all of a sudden at this time, now there's some questions. Now, the $50,000 question is, does the electorate in Livingstone MacLeod deserve to know the content of those posts? And ultimately, that's going to be a decision for the electorate in Livingstone MacLeod. We're going to have a little fun for a sec, just because the rest of this is just so unbelievable. Last week we played a clip where we were talking about the NDP and the accusations that had been leveled by Devin Dreeshen that the NDP were going to bring back Bill 6. And we played a video clip that demonstrated quite clearly that's not what Rachel Huntley said at all. What she said was, you know what, there's still some things that need to be done that we tried to address with Bill 6. We didn't get to finish all the work that we wanted to, but boy, did we learn about the importance of consultation. We're not going to make that mistake again. So anything that we do bring forward will be brought forth with extensive consultation. It's not going to be the same thing. Now, there were some audio squirrels in that clip, but we were very quick to say, you know what, that's not us. The NDP have a history of having some audio issues, and as it turns out, they decided to kick off their election campaign by really leaning into that.
First of all, we need to stop this issue of pitting energy and the economy against doing the right thing on the environment. When you do that, you fail on both. And what we know.
I love that the camera shook for that. But the funny thing is all the way through the press conference that Brian Jean and Rebecca Schultz did, which we're going to get to today, don't you worry, all through that press conference, the UCP were having audio issues as well. It's fascinating how two parties who have raised millions of dollars over the last 4 years, neither of them can seem to figure out how to live stream a press conference with $1 million budget. We have our issues here. Totally own that. We're not running to be government, and we don't have anywhere near $1 million budget. Although thank you to there was like 2 or 3 new people who signed up on our Patreon this week. Thanks for that. it was just such a fun clip. We had to play it. We were trying to find a way to do it, so that's how we did it. We got to talk about the tax cuts, though. Danielle Smith coming in hot with some big announcements about tax cuts. Now, the Coles notes of what Danielle Smith is proposing with the tax cuts is she wants to make a new tax bracket. And the new tax bracket is designed to kick in at a lower level. The idea behind it is that everybody who makes $60,000 and less is going to be paying less taxes on that first chunk of money. And then after that, you'll go up to the regular tax brackets. Now, there's some questions that some people have raised about this new election policy. Some people are saying, well, is it going to be that much money for people who are making less than $60,000 a year? That's up for some debate. But where the concerns that people are really starting to lean into come from, why are we doing this? Catherine Krakowski, who's a reporter who covers Alberta politics, did a very good job of highlighting the fact that the United Conservative Party has actually passed policy that establishes clearly what they believe the provincial tax rate should look like. And it's not a progressive tax where the tax rate changes the more money that you make. They believe, through their member passed policy, that the personal tax rate should be a flat rate. Not only is this change a definitely not a flat rate, but it moves the UCP further away from what their member passed policy is all about, which raises some pretty big eyebrows, because the whole point of the UCP at its inception, until Mr. Kenney reminded everybody who holds the pen, the whole point of the UCP was that it was supposed to be grassroots. It's all going to be member-based policy. The membership is going to decide what we're going to do. The membership is going to decide how we do it. And here's Danielle Smith basically saying, well, that's a real nice policy book. It's pretty. I'm going to put it on a bookshelf and completely ignore it because I need to win me some votes. But that's not the only concern that exists with this tax piece. Trevor Tombe, economist who does a very good job of being extraordinarily objective when it comes to financial issues in the province of Alberta. He put out a tweet where he demonstrated what one of the biggest concerns is with this announcement. The tweet reads, "Big announcement. This is a relatively large tax reduction, $1 billion out of a total $15 billion of provincial income tax next year, and a progressive one. The trade-off is increasing our dependence on resource revenues, rising from needing 21.9% of the budget to come from that risky source in 2024 to 23.4%. Now, we had Trevor Tombe on the show just a little while ago, and we were talking about, hey, what should we do as a province to try to stabilize the economy? What could we do to get off the resource revenue roller coaster, which is something he's quite passionate about? And he was very clear that a reliable tax base is one of the most critical things that's going to be required in order to get us off of that resource revenue roller coaster. And yet here the UCP is going against their own member policy to introduce a tax break that is going to blow roughly a $1 billion hole in the provincial budget, and is going to increase reliance on oil and gas revenues. Now, this also comes at a time when oil and gas revenues are dropping well below what the provincial budget projected for. So the provincial budget that we just saw Travis Taves announce a couple of weeks ago, that provincial budget was predicated on oil prices being a certain number. That certain number is not a number that we're very close to right now, which means the amount of money that we make off of the oil that gets sold coming out of the province of Alberta is less, which means that the budget projections that the UCP put forward are potentially at pretty big risk, because if the numbers don't swing back up, go past that number, and then sustain past that number for at least as long as they've been below that number, then we're going to get less revenue than what was projected. Which is all to say, the province of Alberta is shaping up to make less money than we were told we were going to make, and at that same time, the UCP is blowing a hole in the budget, and they're moving away from their member-based policy, which is just a fascinating choice for them to make. But let's take a look and maybe there's some pundits that could speak to whether or not going into an election, politicians should be doing things like major infrastructure projects, or if they should be doing things like cutting taxes.
And what I'm worried about is that when I have heard the Premier speak, he's been talking about tax cuts. Well, I love tax cuts as much as the next person. But when Klein did tax cuts, he did it after we had already made significant progress on putting aside money to pay down the debt. We're what, $100 billion in debt? We can't continue doing this where we're coming up to an election. And so the progressive conservative strategy was always, well, let's give a little bit to conservatives so we can win their vote. And then let's have massive pay increases for the unions so that we can win the progressive vote. And then what happens is eventually the prices come down and then you're left with an even bigger roller coaster problem and an even bigger.
So there's not really any arguing. That clip, by the way, was compliments of the incredible Twitter account. There's certain, people say social media doesn't make a difference, but there's certain Twitter accounts, there's certain social media accounts that are absolutely performing a public service. And the Twitter account that keeps coming up with all of these amazing clips is the Twitter account Disordered YYC. At Disordered YYC. Whoever is behind that account, apparently they're a big fan of Tom Hanks and volleyball. But they have consistently been a source of clips that have been reported over and over and over and over and over again in the media, and we definitely borrow from their library, but we try to give credit because they do such good work. But that's Danielle Smith talking about the importance of not trying to buy voters with tax breaks right before an election because prices could drop. It's literally the scenario that's going on right now. So once again, we have Danielle Smith who was condemning a tactic, saying, "Oh, these guys shouldn't be doing this thing. It's so bad. It's so bad." And then she comes back and says, "I'm going to do exactly the thing that I condemned everybody for." Moving on from there, though, we got some other things to talk about. And I got to preface this next section a little bit. Because boy, there's a whole lot going on. As we were going to air, this story continues to evolve. So we're going to try to do our best to provide the context that's available as of roughly 8:30 on April 3rd, or sorry, May 3rd. But let's get into it because Brian Jean and Rebecca Schultz held a press conference. That's shocking revelations. See, it's about electricity. So if we build a press conference, this was their title, by the way, not ours. If we build a press conference about electricity and we say there's shocking revelations, you see what we did there? That was an electricity pun. That's literally what was on the press release. But they had some thoughts about the NDP's proposed move to go to net zero by, I think it's 2035. It's been a busy hour and a half. We'll see what Brian Jean has to say because he had some things that he wanted to say at the press conference in response to a question.
The announcement today looked at the cost of net zero by 2035. Your plan is net zero by 2050. How much will that cost?
Well, it's going to cost, anytime you take traditional power sources off the grid, it's going to cost Albertans. We don't know what it's going to cost by 2050, but we do know that we would be complying with the international commitments, and we believe that plan is reasonable and is affordable. It certainly is a lot more affordable than trying to accelerate it over the next 11 and a half years, something that, frankly, nobody else in the entire world is doing. Listen, we have a very small amount of our power on coal right now and have relatively very small amounts of coal over Alberta's existence because of the nature of our population. If you look at China and India and the amount of their base that's on coal, it's staggering, the difference. What we're doing is actually looking at technologies that we can showcase to the world and bring more and better opportunities to the world on electricity generation and in other forms of energy generation. And what we're going to do is not throw the baby out with the bathwater and do radical changes that are frankly politically driven and not done for the best interests of Albertans. We're going to make sure we do this in the best interests of Albertans.
And Carrie, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So you're asking Albertans to look at this and say, not least plan is bad because it's going to cost, it's the most expensive campaign promise of all time. But you're also saying, we also have a promise, but we don't know how much it's going to cost. Why should Albertans select the one where you're promoting is better, but you don't have a price?
And this is where it starts to get really wild. Apparently, and this is based on some tweets that we're going to share in just a second here. Apparently, the figures that the UCP used today had to do with a report that was commissioned by an organization, or commissioned to be completed by an organization called Navius. And this is where things get really complicated really, really quick. But here's what happened. Brian Jean and the UCP did their press conferences where they said, it's going to be $87 billion. That's so much money. That's how much the NDP want to spend. We've got a plan to get to net zero too. We just don't know how much it's going to cost or what that plan is going to look like or what the details of the plan are. So as plans go, it's pretty interpretive dancy. But earlier this evening, we saw these 4 tweets come out from Navius Research. The UCP released a report conducted by us this morning. We've seen the numbers being associated with our report, and we'd like to set the record straight. In this report, we estimate that the macroeconomic cost of achieving net zero in Alberta's electricity sector. We relied on the AESO for an estimate of the investment required to decarbonize this sector, and we're asked to look at the macroeconomic impacts of this investment. It's important to acknowledge that reducing emissions will likely come at a cost. In this case, reaching net zero in the electricity sector leads to a cumulative GDP impact of $35 billion from 2020 to 2040. For context, this represents a reduction in annual GDP growth of negative 0.03%. This $35 billion already accounts for and is not additive to the investment estimated in the AESO report. The cost to Alberta's economy reported in media today is more than double what our model suggests it will be. Our report is available here. And then they provided a link to the report. Now, as of us going to broadcast right now, those tweets are all still up. The link is still up. The report is available for anyone to read. Basically, what that tweet thread seems to be suggesting is, well, Brian Jean and Rebecca Schultz stood up today and said, hey, you know what, the NDP, they've got this plan. It's so crazy. It's going to cost us $87 billion. It's the worst plan ever. Here's the people who actually wrote the report that they were apparently referencing saying, no, it's actually $35 billion. And it represents negative GDP growth of 0.03%, which is a pretty small number when you're spreading it out over 20 years, which is what those tweets say that they were looked at. But this is where things start to get even more complicated, because there was also a thread that went up by a gentleman named Benjamin Thibault, who took a look at the reports and who took a look at the timing of the reports, and he had some questions of his own, because there's some very real problems at play here. First of all, when it comes to who wrote the report, when, and why, that starts to get really complicated really quick. It appears that this is one of a couple of reports that were commissioned. So back in August of last year, the Department of Energy at the time commissioned an analysis of net zero grid back in August. There was an organization that won that. That organization's name was ICF. Now, that report's results haven't apparently been released yet. The UCP caucus, and this is where it gets important to understand a couple things. So when we're talking about how parties operate, especially when they're parties that are in the legislature, if you meet the minimum number of seats to be an official party, you get a caucus budget. You get taxpayer money to do the business of government, whether or not that's opposition or government, but you get taxpayer money. You get a budget to do research, to have offices, to buy coffee filters. I'm guessing. I don't actually know if you can buy coffee filters. But that's taxpayer money. Now, it's critically important that government money and taxpayer money remains separate from party money. So you can't use resources that you got in government or through caucus budgets to do stuff for your party. More often than not, you'll see a very, very clear division between the role that an MLA or minister plays in government, and the role that they play as a party member. It's a very big, important distinction. It's not one that's really publicly known about. Apparently, though, this report was actually commissioned by the UCP caucus, not the UCP party. So it was paid for using taxpayer money. They had it at least since March 31st. They only released it through a party press conference today. And it appears in this Twitter thread as well that there was a little bit of fun that was played with when it comes to how this information was released in the Twitter thread. There's an image included that where it was redacted out that this report was commissioned by the United Conservative Party caucus. Now, as we said, Navius came out and said, "Hey, this is not the what you're reporting is not what we actually said." And Mr. Thibault comes to some interesting conclusions. The UCP hid the analysis, the original analysis that didn't give the number that it wanted. It commissioned another analysis and then appears to have, at the very least, inaccurately reported or inaccurately stated the results. And it actually redacted the report that they issued publicly to hide potentially the fact that it was not the UCP that paid for this report. It was taxpayer dollars that paid for this report. It's complicated, but the long and the short of it is it appears that the UCP misrepresented what the report actually said to the tune of double the amount, and they tried to hide the fact that they used taxpayer dollars to come up with this information. So it's an absolute goat show is the moral of the story. Couple other things that we want to talk about before we get to the really big event from the night, because there was a pretty big deal that happened just a couple of days ago. But we got to take a quick second to talk about our good friends, #sarcasm, at Take Back Alberta. This was a picture that appeared in the Globe and Mail. This is, Take Back Alberta likes to say, we're not a big deal, we're not influencing politics, but clearly the rest of the country is very clearly getting the impression it actually might be. It's important to remember that Take Back Alberta was very clear about the fact that they took credit for getting rid of Jason Kenney. It's important to remember that Take Back Alberta also took credit for getting Danielle Smith elected as leader of the UCP. And they play with some tactics that are definitely a little bit concerning to a lot of folks. But there's another tactic that came out that has a whole bunch of eyebrows being raised. So Take Back Alberta is organizing a webinar for people who want to be scrutineers in the election. Now, a scrutineer is somebody who basically watches the voting process take place. The idea is they're supposed to be somebody who can represent a candidate or a political party to ensure that everything's happening above board. Well, apparently TBA wants their own scrutineers to attend the voting. But where it starts to get really interesting is when we take a look at a couple of the details in the poster that's on the screen right now. So first of all, there's a lot of questions to be asked about why is a third-party organizer, third-party advertiser like Take Back Alberta deciding that they're going to educate and send scrutineers to oversee the election. This is starting to get right out of Republican-style politics. One of the names on the poster we've talked about many times on the show, Benita Peterson. She is the anti-vax freedom fighter who stood outside of hospitals and yelled at nurses and called them liars. She's one of the organizers for Take Back Alberta now, and she's one of the organizers for this webinar for scrutineers. But what's really interesting is if you want more information, then you reach out to this Gmail address, or you can call or text 416-523-1975. But wait a second, 416, that doesn't seem like it's an Alberta area code. And in fact, when you take a look at where the 416 area code comes in, it's Toronto. So if you want to be involved as a scrutineer for Take Back Alberta during the next election, the Take Back Alberta folks who are all about Alberta and all about sovereignty for Alberta and everything Alberta, what they'd like you to do is call Toronto, please. But let's get to the main event, shall we? One of the things that's been going on for quite some time in the province of Alberta has been people have been waiting to find out what's going to happen with some of the court cases that have been going on in regards to people who violated health restrictions or health protective measures, people who were involved in the Coots convoy and the Coots blockade in a way that went above and beyond protest. One of the key figures in a stunning number of the protests that has occurred across Alberta is a gentleman named Artur Pawlowski. Artur's the guy who organized the Tiki Torch marches in Calgary and Edmonton, despite the fact that there was very clear white supremacist overtones, not only associated with the Tiki Torches, but also with the posters that literally used images from Charlottesville where people were killed and injured. That's the type of stuff that Artur Pawlowski plays in. Well, on Tuesday, he finally got the verdict. And the verdict was he's guilty. He was found guilty of 3 things. He was found guilty of mischief, which sounds not that bad. Like mischief, that's curious, George. It's actually criminal. Mischief is a criminal charge, and it carries some pretty heavy consequences. He was found guilty of violating his release restrictions because he'd had other stuff that was going on, and a judge has said, hey, here's the rules, man. Here's the things you can't do. Don't go do them. And by going down to Coots and by telling people that they should stay at the border, that this was going to be their Alamo, he violated his release restrictions. Found guilty on that one as well. But the third one is where it gets really interesting. Because the third one is that he was charged and found guilty of, but we're going to hold on to that for just a little while here, violating the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act. Now, the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act was the act that Jason Kenney brought in very early on. Was actually the first bill that he brought forward when he was elected. And that was in reaction to protests that were happening because of the controversy and the pipeline that was being built through Wet'suwet'en territory. And it's really important to highlight, again, when we're talking about pipelines going through BC, we're talking about unceded territories in most of the cases, which is to say parts of British Columbia that don't technically legally belong to Canada because there's never been treaties signed with the people who have lived there since time immemorial. So there were a lot of Indigenous and First Nations people who said, oh, that's kind of bullshit that you're forcing a pipeline through there, especially given that you're forcing it through some sacred territory. And there were protests that took place. Some of those protests took place around rail lines. Well, Jason Kenney said, you know what, even though the fact that there's already criminal charges that exist if you mess with rail lines, we're going to take it up a notch because we don't want these protesters getting uppity. And he introduced the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, which named a bunch of areas that would be considered critical infrastructure. And if you mess with them, it's a criminal charge. I don't think anyone was expecting that the first person to be convicted under the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act would be a not Indigenous, not First Nations, very white freedom fighter. But that's exactly what happened. Now, this is where, again, it gets into some legal complexity because apparently what's happened is the legal team for Artur Pawlowski, the freedom team, we'll call them with heavy sarcasm. The freedom team is saying, you know what? We're not sure that law of yours is constitutional. So we're going to issue a constitutional challenge to say maybe that law violates the Constitution, which means that conceivably that law could be ruled to be unconstitutional, which would turn into a whole big problem in regards to Bill 1 and how it is enforced and also exists. So that's going to be a fascinating thing. But the sentencing is going to be held off until those questions are potentially resolved. Doesn't matter, though, because Artur Pawlowski was still convicted of the mischief charge, and he was still convicted of violating his release conditions. Now, you might think that somebody who was just slapped with a pretty damning judgment, by the way, there would be some humility. There would be maybe a little bit of I'm just gonna be quiet now. That's not at all what happened.
I am a very privileged man. I want to let you know that I can be found worthy to stand up and fight for all the Canadians and for the Canadians for the rights and freedoms. Again, I'm not ashamed of what I did. If I had a chance to do it again, I'll do it again gladly.
He walked out of the courtroom after he was found guilty, before he's been sentenced, and said, I would do it all again. I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever. I would do everything the same way. I wouldn't change a thing. Which has some really interesting implications, because that's something that absolutely can be considered when the judge is going to issue the sentences, at the very least for the mischief charge, and at the very least for the breach of his release conditions charge. Now, it's important to realize he got in trouble because he was given a set of rules in regards to how he could behave if he was allowed to be out of prison. And here he is on video saying, yeah, I don't actually care all that much. I wouldn't do anything differently. It's going to be fascinating to see how much weight the judge in that particular situation puts on what Mr. Pawlowski said there, because it's definitely a little bit on the controversial side. But it also brings up the whole question of, hey, isn't Artur Pawlowski the same guy that Danielle Smith had that whole phone conversation with? What were Danielle Smith's thoughts on Coots? And again, we're going to give full props to @DisorderedYYC for coming up with... Actually, no, this clip was not Disordered YYC. This came from Press Progress. So Press Progress, immediately after the court verdict was issued, Press Progress released a story that included this clip.
This whole phrase of peace, order, and good government, I think it's become a shorthand to the federal government can do whatever the heck it wants, and we just have to be peaceful and orderly about it. And that's not, in my view, what it should mean. The federal government has said they want every federally regulated industry to have vaccine mandates. So that's broadcast media, radio and television broadcast media. It's all of the telecom companies. It's all of the grain elevators. It's the ports. It's the banks. And so are we going to get to a point where to be able to get a bank account, you're going to have to be vaccinated because you won't be able to walk in the door? I have no idea. But the fact that this is the line in the sand that's been drawn, because the federal government has so much more planned. They have so much more coming. And I think this is the reason why we want to see this win. We want to see it win so that they don't end up rolling out the full plan. And we want to see it win at Coots so that Jason Kenney, Scott Moe together become the first premiers to turn it around at the provincial level so that other premiers will.
So to be clear, Danielle Smith was saying right there, she wanted to see a win at Coots. Now, this interview was done on the exact same day that Sonia Savage issued a statement saying the Coots border blockade needs to end. Please see below my statement in full. It was the same day. So when she's talking about a win at Coots, she's not talking about the legal situation. She's not talking about the court situation. What she's talking about is she wants to see the protesters and the seditionists and the people who are illegally blocking a border crossing, she wants to see them get their way. That's what Danielle Smith said in that clip on the day that Sonia Savage, who was at the time the acting justice minister, the day that Sonia Savage said, this is out of control, it's no good, it's very, very bad. Now, this came up again when Danielle Smith appeared on the Shay Ganem show.
There was also video that surfaced yesterday of you talking about the Coutts blockade on one of the podcasts that you frequented. I think it was your podcast, actually, saying that you wanted to see a win in Coutts. Can you clarify what that means? If there was a win in Coutts, what would that have looked like?
Well, I think the win for Albertans was getting rid of mandates. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that I was opposed to mandates. And you'll recall about this time, I guess it was February of last year, the Premier at the time made the decision that the mandates had just become way too divisive. It was ripping apart families. It was ripping apart friendships. It was creating, I think, tension in society. And so we started moving towards endemic. And I think Alberta really became the first province to move firmly into treating the COVID as pandemic or as endemic. And I continued on that when I became leader. I think a lot of people want to look forward. There's so much optimism, so many people moving to this province, so much investment, so many jobs. I think that's part of the reason why people want to put it in the rearview mirror, and that's what I've been focused on.
It's understandable that Danielle Smith would want to put it in the rearview mirror because she's inextricably linked not only to the blockade at Coutts through her rhetoric, but through her conversation with Artur. She's inextricably linked to it through all of the comments that she's made on her various social media platforms. But here's where the problem really falls apart. That tweet from Sonia Savage came out on February 8th, which is the same day that the vaccine passport system ended. The mandates ended on the 8th. Jason Kenney ended the mandates on the 8th. Now, when did the blockade end? The blockade ended on February 15th, and it only ended after the RCMP confiscated a cache of weapons and body armor and insignias that include not only white supremacist components, but also violent separatist components. That's when the blockade ended, when they realized that because of this cache of weapons, they had lost any possibility of holding any kind of moral high ground. They never had it in the first place. Let's be clear. When you start blocking border blockades like that because you're upset that you can't go to Boston Pizza, that's not freedom fighting. That's a temper tantrum. Period. But nonetheless, Danielle Smith said she wanted it to signal the end of mandates, and that's what she was fighting for. Danielle Smith has backed anti-science rhetoric from day one. She's also backed this bullshit interpretation of libertarianism that isn't actually a thing. She has aligned herself with people who don't want to play by the rules, and if they choose not to play by the rules, they don't want to have any consequences for that. We have seen Danielle Smith's derision for even the concept of consequences over and over and over again. She either lies about what she said and when she said it, or she simply limits the ability of reporters to ask questions. Danielle Smith is completely unwilling to accept any consequences for her actions or for the actions of the people around her. If we take a look at just even the last couple of weeks, at people who presumably should have been the recipients of some kind of consequences, and certainly under the rules that the UCP operated under in 2019 would have gotten consequences. Chelsea Petrovich, whose husband shared pro-Putin propaganda. Chelsea Petrovich, who is a healthcare worker, but also said people who suffer heart attacks need to take more personal responsibility. Chelsea Petrovich, who apparently is sitting on a trove of social media posts so offensive that she had to issue a blanket apology going back 15 years. She's still the candidate for Livingstone McLeod. When we take a look at the candidate from Lethbridge, who just made up a bunch of crap about teachers showing kindergarten students pornography, she wasn't kicked out. She resigned. Even if we take a look at the recent appointment to the Premier's Council for Inclusion and Multiculturalism, when it was revealed that that individual had not only shared anti-Semitic posts, that he not only shared Holocaust denial posts that were so bad that the UCP said in 2019, yeah, you're not going to get to be a candidate for us. You don't even get to be a nominee for us because this stuff is so far over the top. It was the UCP who found those posts in the first place. But it was somehow overlooked despite the involvement of people who were directly involved in the situation in 2019. Somehow it was all overlooked. And Danielle Smith appointed him to be on her Inclusion and Multiculturalism Council. He resigned. He wasn't kicked out. Even if we take a look, just last week, we saw Danielle Smith posing for pictures with convoy leaders, one of whom turned himself in to be arrested not 48 hours ago. One of whom is still facing criminal charges at a UCP event where we're told memberships had to be verified. There's no question that people didn't know who these people were in the room. And even if Danielle Smith does want to claim that she didn't know who the people were in the room, she posed with somebody who was wearing a Truck Trudeau hoodie nonetheless. That candidate, despite the fact that he went after a city councillor, despite the fact that he blames COVID for ruining his business, even though he was blaming the economy for ruining his business months before COVID was even a thing, that candidate remains the candidate. Danielle Smith doesn't have any sort of understanding of what consequences are, and she certainly doesn't appear to have any understanding of what standards are. Danielle Smith will play to the bottom of the barrel every single time, and she enables the people around her to do the same thing. This is the second embarrassing press conference for Brian Jean. As we pointed out earlier today, when Brian Jean first was talking about the Sovereignty Act after Danielle Smith had elected. Now, let's remember, Brian Jean organized a press conference with 3 other UCP leadership candidates to condemn the Sovereignty Act, to talk about how if the Sovereignty Act was introduced in the way that Danielle Smith was talking about, it was going to be an incredibly destabilizing influence on Alberta. But more than that, it was also going to have major economic impact because investors were going to run for the hills. Brian Jean had that press conference with 3 other UCP leadership candidates. As soon as Danielle Smith got elected, Brian Jean stood up at another press conference with Rajan Sani and talked about how the initial draft of the Sovereignty Act, which experts and legal scholars panned as being wildly illegal and wildly unconstitutional, Brian Jean stood up and said, no, the first draft's perfect, but don't need to change a thing. Love it. Now we've got Brian Jean standing up with a report that the people who made the report are saying the UCP misrepresented. Danielle Smith is toxic to the body politic. She has lowered the standard of discourse. This is why we're seeing so many old school conservatives traditional conservatives saying not only is Danielle Smith bad news, she's not actually conservative. She's just out for herself. We saw Thomas Lukasik say that in multiple different venues, including on our show here, where he made no bones about the fact that he doesn't believe that Danielle Smith is anywhere close to representing conservatism. And he alluded to the fact that at best, she's pretty much a puppet who's really, really good at reading lines. But if you ask her for a single critical thought, she goes off the rails. Thomas Lukasik isn't the only person who's saying this. Which brings me to my plug. Oh boy, do we have a show coming up. I am still blown away that we were able to have the conversation that we recorded yesterday with who we recorded it with. There is an individual who I have held in extremely high regard for a very long time, and his willingness to go with what's right as opposed to what is personally advantageous, what is disruptive for him. I can take you back to 2019. Because in 2019, Jason Kenney appeared on a radio show. And the host of that radio show asked Jason Kenney to deal with the candidate who'd said some deeply horrifying things. And Jason Kenney basically went, eh. And that irked the radio host. And so the radio host, instead of just letting Jason Kenney take a walk, like we're seeing Danielle Smith do and get away with, that radio host doubled down and he brought up San Francisco. He did that at a time when Jason Kenney was somebody who he considered to be a friend. He did that as somebody who considers himself to be a lifelong small C conservative. He was the subject of derision by the entire apparatus of the Kenney government. He didn't fold. The man I'm talking about is Charles Adler. And I am so privileged to say that I got to spend an hour and a half chatting with Charles Adler yesterday, and we have that interview, that conversation is going to be coming up on Sunday. It's going to be going up for our Patreon sponsors tomorrow. But that conversation with Charles Adler is going to be coming up on Sunday. And let me tell you, he pulls no punches whatsoever. If you want to talk about people who are eloquent, who are principled, who have depth and breadth of experience and knowledge, you got to put Charles Adler at the pretty close to the top of the list. And in that conversation, he disassembles everything that Danielle Smith and the UCP under Danielle Smith are trying to do. It is one you absolutely do not want to miss. It's a tour de force. I don't even know what else to say about it. But I am so grateful that Mr. Adler took the time to chat with us, and I am so grateful of all of the things that he shared and the perspective that he shared unabashedly. And let's remember that when we're talking about Charles Adler, we're talking about somebody who has lived experience with a lot of really bad things. And so when he's speaking, he's definitely somebody, in the same sense that Thomas Lukasik is somebody who served as an MLA, he served as a minister, he served as deputy premier, he served 14 years in the legislature. When he, as a conservative, when he's coming out and saying Danielle Smith is danger, that's something that we need to be listening to. When Charles Adler is coming out and saying, wow, I thought I had issues with Kenney, that's something we need to be listening to. That's going to be our show on Sunday night. And I am, in case I haven't said it like 16 times already, I am so excited to be able to share that conversation because that man's just, like I said, a tour de force. That's what we've got for this evening. I imagine that there's probably been 15 other things that have happened as we've been doing the show because, of course, there probably have. But at this point now, I'm going to open it up to our regular listeners on the Twitter Spaces. If there's anybody who has any thoughts that they want to share, if there's maybe there have been some developments in this ridiculous $87 billion net zero electric grid situation, I'm sure that there probably have been, that you want to provide provide an update on. If there's anybody who wants to share any thoughts about what's gone on in the campaign so far, I'm going to vamp for about a minute and a half. And if not, maybe we won't do a Lord of the Rings length episode this time around, which is fine because sometimes you don't need to talk for 2 hours. I'm going to take this opportunity, though, to plug again our Patreon page. We are only able to produce the content that we're able to produce here at The Breakdown because of the support that we get from our Patreon supporters. Now, all of our Patreon supporters get early access to all of the interview episodes that we do. That's one of the reasons why there's going to be the Charles Adler episode is going to be up for our Patreon sponsors tomorrow evening. Friday morning at the latest. So if you want to get early access to those things, plus you get the warm fuzzy feeling that comes from knowing that we aggravate so many people in power, and you get to be a part of that. So that's warm and fuzzy too. If you want to be one of our Patreon sponsors, you can do that by signing up at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for the price of just a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce the kind of content that we do. And God knows we're going to need coffee this month because it's only day 3. And this is the dumpster fire that we're navigating. So if you got the means, would love to have that help. But in the meantime, it looks like we do have somebody, one of our regulars. Tammy is in the queue to be a speaker. Tammy, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, not too bad.
That's good to hear.
My topic tonight isn't specifically election specific, but it is in a way. So our family farm that we're not living on because our house burned down about the same time I had my first strokes in 2018. So it's on Range Road 32 and Highway 16. Now, if you've been watching the news, there have been a ton of fires, and some of them were out in the Entwistle, Evansburg area, but there were also fires in the Duffield area. Now, County of Parkland has now announced that they suspect that they are purposefully set. Someone has been setting these fires. Now, this is the part where, there's not a lot that anyone that's on the show can do about that, but to be aware with how things are so dry now, anything can start a fire. The back end of your truck, the exhaust pipe being too hot can set it off in tall grass. But they actually suspect that these have been purposely set. Now here's the politics part of it. So Notley and the NDP candidates have all, in the posts about these things, they've stood up and said, our hearts and minds are with the people that are being, they're suffering with all these fires, that their houses are at risk. Do you know who didn't? And even when I called her on it, none of them said anything. Any of the UCP candidates. None of them. Not a single bloody one. They don't. Rural people need to get it through their head. The UCP do not give a rat's. And that's my way of saying something else. It's kind of rhyming slang about people.
I had not heard that the fires had allegedly been deliberately set. That's really unfortunate to hear.
Yeah, County of Parkland just issued a announcement on Twitter, on their public account, that their guys have been out there and they suspect that it was arson, that it was purposefully set. Now, I can't speak to the ones out in the Evansburg Entwistle way because they're talking in the Range Road 32 to Range Road 30 area. That's the Duffield area. That's the fires that we were worried about, that Mike Girls and our caretaker was out trying to preemptively move things that were still left on the farm that hadn't been stolen and or burnt in the last fire, trying to make sure that they were in a safe place. But yeah, with the fires, you would think they would at least save a moment to tweet out, to say something positive. Someone said that, oh, I hate him. He's the MLA for the area. I hate him. I can't even think of his name. Cheesy man. The one that,
Mr.
the
Getson.
one that said, Mr. Getson, thank you. I think I purposely blocked that man's name from my mind. Someone said, oh, well, he's with the people. I said, well, he could, at least tweet, could say something publicly, because he hasn't.
Yeah, I wish I could say. I mean, we had some fun with this earlier today, because one of the things that came up at the Brian Jean, Rebecca Schultz press conference was they were asked, "Hey, so you're taking questions from the Western Standard and the Rebel? Does that mean that you're gonna be open with all media?" And Rebecca Schultz said, "Absolutely, we're committed to having dialogue with all media." And we're currently blocked still by Danielle Smith ever since we asked her about her GoFundMe and the donation to the JCCF. She blocked us for that one. So,
I know so many people who've been blocked, and I refuse to swear, but honestly, I've been purposely trying to get blocked, and she won't block me. I don't know why she won't block me, but maybe it's because I refuse to swear at her or ask. I've asked specific things, but
I guarantee you, if you were to go on her Twitter timeline right now and be like, "Hey, could you just explain when you donated all that money to the JCCF, did you get a tax receipt that turned in a write-off for you?" I bet you
then
real
I'll get
money you'd be blocked pretty quick, because that's what we've never sworn at her. We've never called her any names. We've never used any language. We've never issued any personal attacks. We've commented on her behavior. We have commented on the things that she said, the things that she's done, but we've never said Danielle Smith is a bad person. That's not, and we certainly haven't used Danielle Smith when she went on Jesperson shortly after winning the UCP leadership race. She gave a list of words that were the only reasons why you would get blocked by her feed, and we definitely have not used any of those words. So there's that.
There's that. No, she's. I just, I don't want to give her this much credit, but her switching stories all the time about what she's doing. She's doing typical U.S. politics. That's what the U.S. politics do. The politicians there, they say one thing, they get, that turns out to not be a popular thing, so then they do the other thing. And then there's no explanation or reason for the change. It's like, she's a liar. What lies?
You're not wrong.
That's just the thing. If one thing doesn't fly, well, she'll just say the opposite thing and hope that nobody, or doesn't really care if anybody remembers the other thing. And unfortunately, a lot of Albertans, I won't say all of them, but a lot of Albertans don't. They just don't seem. I think this time it's changed a little bit.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to cotton on to the fact that they're lying, or maybe they don't care that they're lying, especially amongst the rurals. I don't know.
I think a big part of it is that it's so hard to keep track of. Like, if you aren't paying attention to Danielle Smith on the regular, it's really, really easy to lose track of the fact. Like, you can look at somebody and go, they lied once. Maybe they were, having a bad day, or there was something else going on, or. But if you're not paying regular attention to the list of times that Danielle Smith has lied, I mean, she's just lied.
Yeah.
If you're not. Yeah. If you're not paying attention to that on the regular, it's very, very easy for that stuff to kind of fall through the cracks. And so I think that for a lot of people, there is still, and this was one of the things that Mr. Lukasik and I spoke about when he was good enough to come on our show. there is still a lot of people who want to believe that people who get into elected office conduct themselves with some level of integrity. And I think that for the most part, that has historically been largely true. I think that it's changed a lot over the last little while. And I think that that's a big part of what people are still kind of catching up to. Because I think that most people, there's certainly the fringe that buy into all of the nonsense, but I think that most people, I've had conversations with folks over the last little while who have been like, "Oh yeah, no, this ain't that," and I think it's just going to take. I mean, I'm gonna preface or show my hand a little bit. I like to think about conservatism. This is a metaphor that I've been playing around with my wife a lot, and I know that I'm going to get a look for using it again. But it's like New Coke. When Coke was a recipe for 99 years and everybody knew what they were getting with Coke and they loved Coke, and all of a sudden in 1985, because I was literally reading the history of New Coke just a couple of nights ago, so I could make this metaphor work. In 1990 or 1985, they were like, you know what, we're gonna do a New Coke. And the initial, because it had like way more sugar in it, the initial reception was, oh, that's good. And then after a little bit, everybody lost their minds and hated New Coke. And that's why we have Coca-Cola Classic now, because they brought back the old recipe because they realized how badly they crapped the bed with New Coke. And I kind of look at the whole Danielle Smith UCP experiment as a lot of New Coke. And I think that there's some folks who are going to get past the sugar high real quick. And we're going to see some.
And realize that it's crap. Yeah, I'd agree with that. At least I hope. Because I mean, I'm pretty left leaning, but even I can recognize, back in the day when, and like I was a kid, as much, my parents came from Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and they came to Alberta. And even though they were always quite left-leaning, they were always at least liberals, they never worried about the Conservatives winning. They may not have liked the Conservative policies, but they never actually worried about them. And now I am much like my mom and dad. I am left-leaning. I'm probably a little further left than they were, but I actually worry about the right winning.
Well, it's
because
different.
They don't care.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a thought exercise for anybody who knows anything about Alberta politics and the history of Alberta politics. Given that in 2000, I think it was 4, Mr. Peter Lougheed came out of sort of hibernation and started to raise concerns about the direction of where Alberta politics and where the development of the oil sands were going. Try to imagine what Peter Lougheed's reaction would be to the type and style of governance that Danielle Smith is bringing to the province of Alberta.
He'd be horrified. Yeah. Well, it's like I keep telling people, I'm like, it was really interesting because I said it a few times way back, and then I started noticing other people picking up the same theme, is that Notley, as much as they hate her, she's actually far closer to being a Lougheed PC as far as her policies and how she handles things than the UCP ever will be.
Smith said that herself.
I know.
In 2019, Smith was like, "Oh yeah, Notley's way more Lougheed than Kenny is." So, I mean, I think that's pretty telling. Anything else you want to add in there, Tammy?
No, you have a great night. Great talking to you. And yes, I have actually started to give my few cents to get the early listening because you guys are good. So.
Well, thank you so much.
You have a great night.
You have a great night as well.
All right.
All right. We got Lynn coming from the Fort Mac area. And Lynn, I'm sure you've probably seen this, but as a follow-up to our conversation on Sunday, looks like you got yourselves a non-UCP candidate. How are you doing tonight? Oh,
I'm doing great.
excellent. What's going on tonight, Lynn?
We don't know much about him, but if what my daughter's telling me is true, it's awesome. I don't even care if he's a squirrel. I'm voting for him anyway. To the audience members who don't know anything about Brian Jean, they must be shocked that he's a liar. As for me, it gave me no surprise whatsoever. And so, basically all I wanted to say is I'm happy that we have an NDP candidate. I'm waiting for my response to get a sign, and I'll do whatever I can to help him. Unfortunately, at this time of year, which is actually 7 years since the fire, people on social media are still talking, and this is one reason my husband doesn't like Rachel, is the fact that she called Brian fear-mongering when we actually needed to do something about our fire. So I'm hoping that doesn't affect us. So far, we've put out the fires that we've had around here, but it is a huge point, and he will use that to his benefit here.
I can only imagine how deep those scars run up there, Lynn, because I mean, I can tell you, I was part of the response for that whole experience, and in walking through some of the neighborhoods that I walked through while all of that was going on. If you weren't there in the immediate aftermath, I still can't fully comprehend the scope of what I saw there, and so I can completely understand how there would be some very serious sensitivities in regards to that. Because I remember, for me, I remember when Rachel Notley did the tour with Justin Trudeau, and I don't mind saying that I was put off when she made the joke about, wow, it's like walking through the set of The Walking Dead, because that to me was a complete failure of leadership, and I sincerely hope that she's grown some since then, that she wouldn't be quite so flippant at a time when people are looking into her for direction. So I can understand the bitterness, but I think that at the same time, you have to take a look at what the alternative is.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree, and I think her seeing it, and maybe, yes, I agree it was flippant. I applaud her for immediately putting out statements about the other fires, but I got to tell you, yesterday was a gong show here. Just one fire with an alert for one area, which would totally block off the highway if it happened. The PTSD in this town was at 110%.
Oh, I believe it.
There was fights up the hill getting gas. It was just crazy, right? But I'm hoping that doesn't, I mean, I'm trying to be realistic here. People are going to vote for him. I know that. So a vote for the NDP is a vote, that will say something to the PCs.
Absolutely.
But, I'm not putting a lot of hope into that, but at least I have somebody that I can actually vote for now. So that's a good thing.
Well, I'll tell you.
Anyway, I'll let you.
The conversation that I had with Mr. Adler, one of the things that he said, I'm just going to keep talking about it because it was such a good, it was an amazing conversation is all I can say. But one of the things that he did is he appealed, and he's done it since. He's appealed to conservatives, small C conservatives, who would identify as being the type of conservative that would have voted PC for, 44 years or something. If you can't vote NDP, if you can't get there, stay home. And so when you have people like Charles Adler, when you have people like Thomas Lukasik saying, if you can't get there, that's cool, but don't be voting in a bad way, that's pretty telling.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, a lot of people in Alberta have a lot of respect for Charles. And he's been out there. He's on Jesperson every Monday. He's been on the Eager Beaver podcast, I think, for like 90 minutes. He was on, I forget his name, James Fiore. He was on his podcast. Like, you guys can listen to him and understand where he's coming from, because it was huge for him to do that.
Oh, the man believes in service.
And,
there's no getting around that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anyway, I'll let you go. Thanks a lot, and pray for us here in Fort McMurray that we don't get the same fires. And because people say, well, there's nothing to burn up here. There's a lot to burn up here. I can tell you, out my garage door, there's a lot to burn.
I have no doubts. And yeah, we'll be sending all of the positivity your way for sure.
Okay, take care, guys.
All right, I'm gonna bring in Andrea now, who did a little video that I was quite fond of. Andrea, are you here to get loud?
I'm here. Hi.
How's it going?
Good. Did you see LaGrange announce tonight?
Oh crap! What happened now? You go and try to do a show.
She's running again.
Well, okay.
She said yesterday, I confirmed by-elections Alberta as the UCP candidate for Red Deer North. I humbly ask for your vote so that I can continue to strongly represent you and keep Alberta moving forward. What?
Well, she did represent some constituents extraordinarily well. Cough, masks, cough.
It's Education Week. It's Education Week right now. She's been silent.
Who's yeah. I have complicated feelings on that one, Andrea.
Like, who is she running against? Is there an NDP in her riding?
They have a full slate, so there has to be somebody running there. But like, here's the thing with LaGrange. I think that Albertans need to remember, especially. I mean, come on, Red Deer, prove me wrong. But you know, this is the person who oversaw the curriculum draft that was straight up racist. This was the person who oversaw the curriculum draft that couldn't identify lakes and which provinces they were in. This is the person who oversaw the curriculum draft that asked children to locate gravity on a globe, and then dumped a boatload of money towards somebody who supported her in the election instead of just ordering masks from a local supplier because those masks were made in Mexico, or B, just saving money and ordering them all from Old Navy. Like, I am hard pressed to think of, you know, I'll ask you, you're a teacher. You were involved in the education system for a good part of LaGrange's tenure. What's one good thing you can say about Adriana LaGrange? Okay.
She makes memes about Umbridge from Harry Potter really easy.
I mean, that's true. It is low-hanging fruit on that one. Oh, dear.
Like,
yeah, that's all we got. What do you got to talk about tonight? I could riff on Adriana LaGrange with you for quite some time, but what do you got to talk about tonight, Andrea? Because you put up a video that we shared.
Yeah. Here's the thing is, I don't know where to start, right? Like, it's all just a web of things that don't make sense. And I don't have answers. I just have a lot of questions. Like, it's Education Week. And if you look at the one picture that is being used by all of the different party, stakeholders for Education Week, there's the logo for the ATA and there's the logo for school councils, but there's no logo for school boards. And I don't know why. Like, are they not on the same team? Are school boards, school councils, and teachers not all in this, like, playing for the same goals here? Like, why do boards not echo the concerns that teachers have? And I have part answers, but I don't have full answers. Some of the answers come with, well, they're scared. They're scared of LaGrange because if they go against LaGrange, she'll just replace them with somebody who will do what she wants. And I get that, but they're elected to advocate for public education.
A lot of them campaigned on it.
Like that was what they asked. That was their. They got hired to do that, right? Like, so, like they didn't come to the rally in Edmonton. And when I go to parent council meetings, and the school council rep for the association rep explains what's going on, and then I ask what the trustee says, like, why didn't you go, and why isn't class size a priority? Like, so school boards, they have so many meetings. They just go to meetings all the time. Just meeting. And they have 2 big meetings a year. And the fall one, they had hundreds of things to prioritize and then come up with their top 5. And the trustee came into our meeting and talked about how it took an entire day to just get the wording right on those top 5 priorities. One of them was interministerial cooperation, which would be great because that would pull in the services, like the healthcare side of it. So that'd be mental health, and that would be child services, and that would be anything to do with like respite cares and all of that sort of stuff. Make them actually hang out together and work together. That's great. I don't remember 2 of them, but the other 2 were masking and making sure that trustees don't get blindsided by LaGrange. And then she blindsided them within 24 hours to take out masking and blindsiding. And so I asked about why class size isn't a priority. Why didn't make the top 5? And he said, well, honestly, it's because public school in Edmonton, their board is so big, and they want to hang out with the media. They want to have those talking points, and they wanted to talk about masks. I was like, I'm sorry, what? So he said it was because the parents put the pressure on the biggest school board in the province, plus Calgary, but Edmonton, to do the masking thing. I'm like, so they're just scarier? Like, you're just scared? So why can't parents of kids who need extra help be as scary as those parents? Like, can we get loud? Can we do that? And I'm looking around the room, and everyone's kind of not getting it, because normally you go to those meetings to talk about fundraising. And he said good questions, and he was open to it. But then I went to another meeting, and the board chair explained that they couldn't put class size as a top priority because they had to be reasonable.
What does that even mean?
I don't even know. But it made me think, like, if everybody's being reasonable, if everyone's only asking for what's reasonable, then that explains a hell of a lot. Because I don't want to put unreasonable pressure on my kid's teacher, right? Like, I don't want to be unreasonable. I don't want to be that parent. But I do need to advocate, but I don't want to be unreasonable. So when I look back at the documents that go along with him, with his IPP, I was trying to be reasonable. I wasn't shooting high enough. So I was like, well, no, I'm not going to sign that document. We need to redo that and aim higher. We need to have higher expectations because he can reach those goals. And if we set the bar too low, then that's just going to set the pace forever. But that made me think, well, she's got a group. And when she goes to talk to her principal what she needs, she doesn't want to be pushy and a burden. She doesn't want to, she knows that there's limited resources, so she's going to be reasonable. And then the principal's going to do the same thing, and I've seen her do it in meetings. She doesn't ask for everything that she needs. She asks only for what's reasonable. For example, funding. If she needs to raise money for a cap on how much she can charge parents for this, that, and the other, she's reluctant to ask the parent council for too much. And we're like, well, it's a cap. It's not like you're going to spend all of it, but it's a safety net in case you need to. So set the cap higher because inflation's a thing and this is a thing. And if you don't use it all, great, we trust you. Ask for more. And it's hard to get her to do that, which means is she doing that when she goes to the next level high up? Is she just not asking for what's reasonable? So by the time you get to the trustees, they don't actually know what really needs to happen. Everybody's just being nice. And it's because, in my opinion, that everybody's just scared of the level above them, of being called out for not doing enough. So, or being blamed for systemic issues. So the teachers is afraid, and everyone's just afraid. And it starts with LaGrange. So trustees are afraid of getting fired, and then principals are afraid of this. And like, it's just, the accountability is upside down. It would be amazing if principals could be accountable to their teachers. So when a teacher says, this is what I have in front of me, and in my professional opinion, this is what I need to be successful this year with these kids. And it might change as we go because we get kids in, get kids out. I'll notice things. This is what I need to be successful. And the principal could be accountable to the teacher and say, you know what? I got you. And they collect all of that information from the school, go hire. And the hire says, I see you. I trust you as a professional. I know you need this. I'm going to go hire and have your back and go up to the ministry. If it was prioritized that way, a lot of these things would get fixed, but it's not. Everybody's just, that picture of the birds and the management system where everybody looks up and sees assholes and everybody looks down and sees shitheads?
I don't know that picture, but I love it.
Like, it's all very complicated because if you ask the government what's going on and why my kid can't get what's in the legislation, so my frustration comes because my expectations aren't being met. But my expectations are literally what's written in the legislation, what's written in ministerial policy and admin procedures and board policy. That's it. That's my bar. Just the laws and the rules as written.
But I would argue, Andrea, that the problem, and I think I'm going to use an example that has some proof of concept behind it. So I'm going to use the example of the EMS hallway waits. This is an issue that we've talked about on the show before. This is an issue that's been going on in the province of Alberta for a very, very, very long time, going back decades, where people have been talking about how the practice of having paramedics wait in the hospital hallways was causing not only a lot of practitioner burnout, but it was also causing massive resource depletion, which is why we were seeing no ambulances available. We had conversations on the show with Mike Parker, who's the head of the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, which is the paramedics union. We had conversations with people who had gone through and done FOIP requests, and there was no question, here's what the problem is. And the only thing it lacked was political will. And this is where I resent the holy hell out of the fact that I do have to give Danielle Smith and her cadre of folks some props, because everybody said for years and years and years, there's no way to solve this problem. And Danielle Smith and her chief health administrator said, I think that might be bullshit. We're going to say they have to be out in 45 minutes and sort yourselves out from there. And it's worked.
Yeah, I feel like that would work in the education system too.
Well, this is what I'm saying.
If you have a teacher who says this kid needs to be assessed because there is something going on there that is beyond my capabilities as a professional, and I need to call in different services because there is something going on there. If that teacher sees that and says that kid needs to be assessed, we need to know what's going on. Can we just make that a rule where if a kid gets identified and flagged, that it's just done?
Well, this is where we need to elect people that we can hold accountable. And I mean, I think that's got to be one of the key parts of the conversation. There's all of the policies that are being announced and then unannounced because numbers are hard. and all of the other things. But I think at the end of the day, I think one of the questions that everybody needs to be asking all of the political candidates is, are you going to be accountable? Like, when things are going off the rails, if you don't speak up and avail yourself of all of the powers that exist in your office, are you going to be accountable to me? How are you going to be accountable to me? Are you just going to blow smoke, or how are we going to do this here? And I think that that's a critically important conversation because, Danielle Smith ran on a, for leadership. She ran on a boatload of issues, and most of them she couldn't deliver on. And I think that that elevated the importance of the ones that there was a pathway for her to deliver on. And I think that that's one of the reasons why. Like, I'm actually surprised, to be honest with you, that she's not uh, talking about that piece more because, like I said, I'm absolutely not. In no universe will I be voting
No,
for
but
for Team Danielle Smith, but I can give props where
it
props
would
are
play
due.
really well to undecided. Yep, it would.
Yep.
It would play well. So, yeah, like their platform has a specific number. I can't remember what the number is, but I did the math based on there's around 750,000 kids in education in Alberta ish. If I'm wrong, somebody tell me. But I feel like that was right. The number for helping kids who need extra help is about $100 a kid, $113-ish rough. Do you know how much each kid in that hub school is going to be worth? 59,000 each.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
There we go.
So, as a parent who has to lobby to get an EA to even just be there half time, and I'm pretty sure that they're like breaching Jordan's principle to be able to do that. Like, Jordan's principle is so effective. That's why there are EAs as many as there are. But someone should be tracking how much those specific EAs are not completely being used just for that principle right now.
Gotcha. Anything else you wanted to add on?
Just like we should be getting parents to ask specific questions like, how many kids are waiting for diagnostic testing? How many kids got diagnostic testing and can't access the services that is spelled out in their documentation? That's like going to your doctor and saying, okay, here's what you got. You got something acute and something chronic. Which one would you like to pick? Because, we actually can't treat both. A kid with an individual program plan, if they have been coded with more than one code, you actually have to fudge the second one in there somehow with like slick wording because they're only allowed to address one of them.
Wow. There's that then.
Oh, there's so many.
I imagine we could do a whole episode about it. I do have two other people in the queue that I want to get to, though.
All right.
So
next time.
Next Wednesday, same time, same place. You can bring a list.
Sure.
Sounds good. All right. I'm going to move on to Cassandra, and then we've got Pete in the queue, and then I think that will probably take us to borderline full-length feature. So, hey, Cassandra, what's going on?
Well, I'm going to be short today. There's so much I could talk with Andrea about, the advocating I had to do for my daughter in school. I am totally empathetic towards her, but I just wanted to, I kind of decided to pop in and speak because, there was a little bit of controversy on Twitter and some places about where is Danielle Smith, because of course she kind of was supposed to be on media blackout because she went into hiding, and people were surmising it had something to do with the fact that Artur Kowalski was being, the results of the outcome of his trial was being announced. But what she did do, she came on last night on a Facebook Live, and it was called Live from the War Room, nightly update from the War Room. And I just noticed today they changed it. It's now nightly update from UCP headquarters. I guess, I don't know, maybe people took issue with War Room. But so she is, I guess this is her alternative. I'll warn you now, if you go in there, it is an echo chamber of everybody that supports her, and there's not really any dissenting voices in it. But that's what she is apparently doing, rather than doing full media and press. She's having long conversations with herself on Facebook Live.
I was just looking at her, and yeah, it has been changed to nightly update from the UCP headquarters. And as I'm looking at it, I'm realizing that the dude who's hosting it is the same guy from the clip that we played earlier, where she was talking about how there needs to be a win at Coots. So that's fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know. But I just thought I would pop in and say that. Yeah, so it's not the media blackout we thought it would be. She actually has found a venue where she can just talk to herself and not have any dissenting questions come at her. And that's where it is. If anybody wants to hop on and throw some dissenting questions in, that ought to be fun.
I imagine it's super curated.
I know. It's sometimes it's just fun to troll the trolls. I'm guilty. I admit it. And the only other thing I was going to say is that I don't know. I can't remember. Somebody was asking about Tabor Warner. I just looked. They finally updated it. There is the candidate for Tabor Warner is Jasmine Hintz, and the other one. There was another one, and I can't remember what it was now. It doesn't matter. But I just wanted to pop that in because I couldn't remember who it was that was in Tabor Warner that was asking about, I'd like an NDP candidate. And if they're listening tonight, that is your candidate for Tabor Warner.
There you go. Well, they do have a full slate. I saw that right after, it was very, very early Monday, they announced, we got a full slate now. So.
Yeah, no, there's a full slate. They're going to run a full slate no matter what. That's how they won in 2015. It wasn't necessarily that they even thought that they necessarily had a chance, but they just made sure that there was a candidate in every single riding, so at least they were on the ballot, and it worked well. And so but that's all I got for tonight.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tapping in with that. I'm going to add in Pete here. And then I think Pete's going to probably be our last speaker of the evening, and we'll wrap things up there. Pete, what's going on tonight? You're unmuted, and yet I cannot hear you, so I don't know what's going on. Maybe Pete's not going to be our last speaker. Maybe it will be Cassandra. Pete, I don't know what to tell you there, man. I can see that you're unmuted, but I have no idea why I am not getting any audio from you at all. That's super weird. We'll give it a couple of seconds. I'll plug the Patreon one more time, and if we don't get Pete in, then we're going to wrap it up for the night. Actually, I'm not even going to plug the Patreon. I already did that, and that feels heavy-handed. So I'm just going to remind everybody, if you're listening to the podcast version of this, we are super active on Twitter. The DMs are always open. So if you have the ability and the means, and you want to have a little bit of a conversation, you can tweet us at the Breakdown AB. I don't know why, but for some reason my comment section isn't loading tonight, so I can't see what all the comments are from the Facebook and the YouTubes. But thanks everybody who's presumably there. Looks like Pete has requested. We will give it one more shot. You there now, Pete? I think you have to unmute yourself. The stars might just be crossed.
Hello.
There we are. How's it going, man?
Okay. Good. Yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. What's going on tonight, my friend?
I do have a question about Artur, but just for the person who talked 2 people ago, one thing they might want to consider is doing what Kadak did about 10, 15 years ago. And they did an ADHD school report card, which basically surveyed the different education systems and how bad do you discriminate against people with ADHD? That's not the exact wording, but essentially that was the result. And they graded them A, B, C, D, and explain it. And they got a lot of great media coverage. So if they could do something like that, or to sort of have some survey of how many we surveyed, like do what BC Ed Access did in BC, where they surveyed people on how many people had their kids expelled, right? And they broke it down by ADHD, LD, different sort of conditions. And then you're giving the media something.
Oh, interesting.
Hey,
Okay.
here's a story versus here's my anecdote. Because your anecdote may be part of a bigger story, but if it's a lone anecdote floating out in the Arctic ice floe, no one's going to take it that seriously. If you have a story with a group of anecdotes, then you can take that person on the ice floe and say, here's an example, and here's the rest of the story.
That's a cool idea, man. I
So,
think
Follow-up question.
yeah.
How do you get a board to willingly admit to that? Like,
Oh, no.
been
They
thinking
survey
that kind of
parents. No,
Oh.
assume malice and hostility from boards. I mean, maybe not always. It depends on the board. But what they did, I would encourage you to check out BC Ed Access. They've got a public Facebook group, a private Facebook group. They have a conference once a year. It's basically about parents of special needs kids trying to get access to an education system that's absolutely hostile to anyone who has a special need. And so they just surveyed their own members, right? And they did it in a structured way. And then they went to the media and they've got some press around that. And because the thing is, a politician, left, right, or center, right? I mean, we've got the NDP here. They promised to actually, Rob Fleming, the BC NDP education minister, promised to add ADD as a category to special ed so they get accommodations IEP. He lied about it. I did a campaign, IEPs for ADHD, to get school board trustees, if they were elected, to promise, when will you fulfill your promise, right? You kind of have to assume a certain degree of possible malice by the government. If you don't have a big enough constituency, you don't have politically active enough, you don't have parents who can drop a lot of money on politicians' campaigns and stuff like that. So yeah, create your own. Like find some. I'm assuming there's some sort of special needs group or groups in Alberta of parents of kids with special needs.
I would assume so.
Hold my hand, Alberta comes first to mind. But yeah, you're right. There's got to be more.
Or one thing to do is check out BC Ed Access. I'm sure other provinces have similar ones, and see what they're doing. I'm not saying do everything like them, but do it. I think one of their successes, they have like a public thing, where there's a public Facebook group, public Twitter, and they got a private group. Right, so you can talk to parents, other parents in the same condition, who have, multiple conditions, LD, ADHD, autism, etc. Or, I mean, if you really want to do great things and you have a lot of parents who are willing to sort of advocate publicly and put in time and effort and go public on TV with yourself and your kid, do what the autistic parents have done here, and it took them about 10 years. They fundraised. They went public on TV with their kid. They had, I remember seeing one conference where literally they had the lieutenant governor, they had police chiefs, plural, fire chiefs, plural, a crap ton of media, a whole bunch of celebrities. And one of the advantages thing is they had one of the Canucks owners had a kid with autism. So they created the Canucks Autism Network. And so they went to public events, like Car Free Day or something like that. They had a whole tent, which is like 3 tents, with all of these volunteers raising awareness on autism. So ideally, I don't know what condition your kid has. You don't have to tell me if you don't want. But if you're advocating for like single conditions, ideally find somebody who's got a lot of money and has got a kid with that problem or a relative with that problem, right? And then have someone with some organizational skills to sort of utilize that. They get access to their network, right? Because you're probably more likely to return a billionaire's call than if I or you call, right?
There we go. And you had an Artur comment as well?
Yes. So, just I'm amazed at he was only charged with mischief, and I know mischief is a crime, but I mean he literally said that some of you may die, and this is our Alamo. Well, in the Alamo, all the Texas soldiers were massacred. So I mean he's essentially calling for these guys to murder police, to be essentially cop killers. Now, you can criticize individual police actions, but I mean, like, killing them? No. I mean, like, why wasn't he charged with terrorism offenses? And why did they not mention that? And why, I just can't see for the NDP, why are they not mentioned? You did stochastic terrorism to murder cops, and just ask every UCP candidate, do you stand with the cop killer inciter, or do you stand with the police?
I think part of
isn't that like shooting fish in a barrel? Why are they not doing that?
One would think, but I think that part of the challenge is that the conversation around Artur has been complicated by the fact that it went from the story broke that Artur and Danielle Smith had the conversation that they did, and then the story broke from there that Danielle Smith was looking at suing the CBC. So she got to hide under the umbrella of, well, I might be suing the CBC, so I can't talk about it. And then the NDP went and made a complaint to the ethics commissioner, which will result in nothing if you know what the ethics legislation is in Alberta.
Even though I get that.
Yeah, exactly. So then that gave the umbrella for Danielle Smith and all of the UCP to say, we'd love to talk about it, but we can't because there's this ongoing investigation. So there's been a very successful campaign since sort of the alignment and proximity between Smith and Artur has really come to light, that has made it very, very difficult for anybody to sort of hold either Smith or the UCP to account, because you ask the question, hey, so Artur Pawlowski, you don't stand with him, right? And any of the MLAs or any of the UCP candidates can say, hey, you know what, I believe in freedom, but this matters under whatever it's under at the time, so I can't comment on it.
Yeah, but what they could say is, you could see the video. It's reported in the media that he called for stochastic terrorism against cops, called for people to murder police. Do you agree that police should be murdered to help spread the plague? Are you pro police murder or are you against police murder? You don't have to comment about the actual case. It's just a very simple question.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're so slippery, though, man.
Am I blind?
No, I don't think.
I get the against the courts. I totally get this, but I mean, this is the most easy layup, slam dunk in the world, right?
You would think, but it's. I mean, I would take a look. Here's where that goes off the rails. There was a conversation on a show that we have here in Alberta called Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson just a couple of days ago, and it featured one of the campaign organizers for the UCP, one of the campaign organizers for the NDP, and it was just two people going at each other for, I don't know, it was like 45 minutes, and there was no answering of questions. It was all, I'm going to make a point against you, and then that person responds by making
bullshit.
It's so we're talking about when it comes to the UCP, many of their candidates either know not to put themselves in a position where they would be asked those questions, or they'll simply, I mean, there's a reason why the Premier of Alberta is now only taking one question and no follow-ups. It's because
Oh
you
yeah.
can ask her that question and she'll say, I like the color blue. And
Yeah.
that's her answer.
She'll
Next
just
question, please.
gaslight, word salad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating, and I do think that, you know, I think that there's a good segment of Alberta that would love nothing more than to have Danielle Smith and the UCP clearly define where they stand on the Coots blockade, where they stand on Artur, where they stand. I mean, there's no shortage of characters that exist out there, but I think that a lot of them have spent a lot of time over the last couple of years generating and rage farming as much as possible in order to
Sure.
drive as many donations as they can. I mean, take a look what Smith campaigned on. She wanted to deputize plane loads of Albertans vacationing in Florida as ambassadors to get around travel restrictions. Like, that's where we are, man.
Oh no, I mean she wants to turn Alberta into Florida, not even Texas, Florida. Yeah. So I mean, just one last thought: the NDP should just say, "Hey, we're against people calling to murder the police, and as this is where we stand. Ask your BC candidate, you know, where do they stand?" And so that it doesn't even require them to sort of like being asked in the Cam Train show. You're making that contrast. And you do it in whatever, you know, language that sort of works for them. But I mean, that's such a, I mean, it's evil what he did, but it's such a gift politically for them not to not use it in some way, just even on their framing, and just like, here's where we stand. And this is where they apparently stand. If you're not sure, go and ask them.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
There's no shortage of, I mean, that's one of the things that I've been fascinated with over the last little while, is that there's so many of those like perfect layups where, but the problem is the volume of bullshit that gets churned out is, it's, if it was just like the occasional little
It's
droplet or
Steve
whatever.
Bannon, flood the zone with shit.
Entirely.
I mean, she's running a Steve Bannon campaign.
Yep.
And that's hard to sort of to deal with.
It is. But you know, I do have, I personally, and I'm gonna bring it back to what Lynn was talking about earlier, where she was talking about the fires and such. I do remember.
Yeah, how could you not say? I mean, like, that takes nothing. That's just like, hey, we stand with these people who are getting burned out. I mean, that's not political. Like, why would they not say anything? They're not even asking for money.
It's not what their focus is.
Right? Like,
would be my guess.
What?
It doesn't affect
people
me.
being
Why do I
burned out
care?
of home when you've got a rural base. I mean, that's just like electoral seppuku. No?
I don't disagree with you, man. I think that we have especially in the UCP, I think that there is a group of candidates that are under now under such strict control in regards to what they're allowed to say, when they're allowed to say it. I mean, the fact that we saw that, like I said earlier, the candidate for Livingstone McLeod come out and say, please ignore everything I said for the last 15 years. I mean, that's
got to be some kind of award. I mean, I've heard a lot of weird things. I never heard anything like going that far.
I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah.
I didn't know
I
that you could just be like,
myself for the past decade and a half.
Exactly.
I was an idiot, and my brain was hijacked by aliens. But now I'm normal.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yikes.
But
okay.
Yeah, thanks for
the show, and
keep
going at her.
I will do for. I want to just address a DM that we got real quick before I sign off, because there was a couple people who were asking about the consequences for mischief. So I got the criminal code up over here, and the punishment for mischief. Just to be clear, this is no small thing. Everyone who commits, this is section 2 of the, it's 430 of the criminal code, and then it's number 2 in brackets. Everyone who commits mischief that causes actual danger to life is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for life. Everyone who commits mischief in relation to property that is testamentary, instrument, or the value of which exceeds $5,000 is guilty of an indictable offense and liable for a term not exceeding 10 years. Everyone who commits mischief in relation to property other than property described in subsection 3 is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment of term not exceeding 2 years. So there's relation to property, and it appears that based on the definition, it would be the 10-year would be the maximum penalty that Mr. Pawlowski could be looking at. And it's going to be fascinating to see how that video performance of him saying no remorse, no regrets is going to play into that. That's our show. Big thank you to everybody who joined in on the Twitter Spaces. Again, I don't know why I can't see the chat comments tonight. Hope it was busy in there. I'm going to read them after because that's what I always do anyways. But it's day 3 on the campaign trail. We're going all the way to May 29th. Like I said, we have it's a bombshell of an episode coming up on Sunday with Mr. Charles Adler and all. That'll be up shortly for our Patreon folks. And then we'll be back next Wednesday with another live show, trying to keep up with everything that happens over the next 7 days. Everybody have a great week. We'll see you next Wednesday. Take care of yourselves. And as always, especially now more than ever, with everything that's going on with the election in effect, find somebody in the next week who you haven't spoken to about the politics stuff and try to have a conversation with them. Even if you don't necessarily change their mind, just try to have the conversation with them, because one of the things we have to do is get better at having conversations. It's something that we just need to do because the silo and the isolation is not healthy for anyone. So there's your action item for the week. And in between time, take care of yourselves. Keep the conversation going.